Thursday, May 6th, 1915. As the sun was rising at 5:30 a.m. in the morning, passengers were suddenly awoken to the loud noises of crew members working on the lifeboats. One by one, the canvas covers of the lifeboats were removed, the boats attached to the davit chains, then slowly and carefully swung outwards. In but a short period of time, all of the main lifeboats aboard the Lusitania were swung outwards by the order of Captain Turner, as the ship sailed closer to the war zone. Many of the passengers awoken by these noises were reassured that this was just done out of precaution, though this did little to ease the anxiety many of the passengers were feeling about submarines. This event only served to fuel the subject of submarine talk. The Lusitania on this day sailed through calm seas under sunny skies, the warm weather contributing to a pleasant atmosphere aboard the ship. Among the highlights of the day were concerts held in all three classes, organized to raise funds for charity, a tradition on transatlantic liners at the time. This was directly in continuation of the charity held the previous night for the Sailors' Orphanage at Liverpool. On a recent voyage aboard the Lusitania, poor weather had hampered such efforts. Many notable performers became too seasick or even injured to appear, but this time, the concert lineup featured a number of professional entertainers. This voyage included several performers of note: actress Rita Jolivet, fresh off the release of her first film, The Unafraid; rising stage singer Josephine Brandel; opera singer Millicent Baker, who had fled Europe during the war; pianist Harwood Knight, and several others. There were also many passengers with backgrounds in music hall and regional theater, including Hilda Stones, who sang the Rosary to close out the second-class concert. The evening of May 6th was traditionally the most formal and festive night of the crossing. Many of the passengers headed for dinner that night dressed up in formal attire. That night in the first-class dining saloon, the 5-man string band played for the passengers. As fate would have it, though, this was to be the final dinner ever served aboard the Lusitania. After dinner in first class, passengers went up to the lounge to listen to the band perform that evening, whereas the second-class passengers proceeded up to their lounge for the night's whist drive, led by Preston Pritchard. However, at 7:56 p.m. up on the bridge, Captain Turner received the warning: submarines active off the south coast of Ireland. This was sent direct to the Lusitania after the sister steamships Candidate and Centurion were sunk with no lives lost by U-20 just hours earlier. During the intermission of the evening concert in first class sometime after 8 p.m., Captain Turner stepped forwards to address the assembled passengers. He acknowledged the ongoing threat of submarines and the ship's entry into the declared war zone. He furthermore stated that the ship would be completely blacked out of all lights as a precautionary measure, and that men should not smoke up on deck. Turner then reassured the audience that they would soon be safely under the protection of the Royal Navy. The captain then silently departed the first-class lounge and traveled aft towards the second-class lounge to repeat the announcement. What followed afterwards was a great sense of paranoia and extreme nervousness amongst the passengers. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, a team of officers led by Senior Third Mate John Lewis conducted a thorough night inspection of the vessel, a measure prompted by the increasing risk of submarine attacks. Captain Turner had ordered for all of the portholes to not only be closed, but also curtained to prevent any light from escaping. Doors leading to the exterior decks were to remain shut, and the ship's running lights were extinguished. The inspection team also surveyed all accessible portholes and windows in the public areas and those visible from the decks. However, Cunard policy prevented from them entering passenger staterooms. Instead, any non-compliance was noted, and a list of open portholes was discreetly left for the stewards. Though passengers had been instructed to keep their portholes shut, the unusually mild weather led many to reopen them for ventilation. That night, many passengers had trouble sleeping in their berths, knowing how serious the threat of submarines were. Many could not sleep, fearing that the ship might be torpedoed during the night in the darkness. Some passengers decided to camp out or sleep for the night in the first-class lounge, which remained open, whereas others decided that it would be a better idea to sleep in different cabins with friends or family members to help ease their nerves. Some passengers in third class even slept out on deck that night under the starry skies. Some concerned stewards remained awake that night, working overtime to ensure that the anxiety-induced passengers were feeling alright and had access to refreshments. The night of May 6th was to become the most anxiety-filled night of the crossing, with many passengers refusing to even sleep. On Friday, May 7th, 1915, the day began with promise. At 4:30 a.m. in the morning, just as the sun was beginning to rise, the high-speed destroyer, HMS Partridge, making 30 knots, was spotted by passengers. It was a reassuring sight. Theodore Nash, who had been confined to bed by seasickness for nearly the entire voyage, finally ventured onto deck to watch the sunrise with his wife, Belle. They noticed a military vessel sailing parallel to the Lusitania. As breakfast was served that morning, a dense fog rolled in at approximately 8:30 a.m., and the Lusitania reduced her speed significantly. In response, the ship began to sound her foghorn, an action that drew concern amongst the passengers, many of whom were seasoned travelers familiar with wartime protocol. Nearly 100 people who were aboard the Lusitania at this time had previously crossed on the Lusitania during wartime, and about half of that number had done so since Germany's declaration of unrestricted submarine warfare in February. The tension of the morning, made only greater by the fog, the eerie horn blasts, and the ship's sluggish pace, finally gave way to much relief as the fog lifted by 11 a.m. that morning. The sea was calm and sparkled in the brilliant sunshine, the sky brilliantly clear, and the Irish coast was now visible. Experienced travelers remarked that the ship had never hugged the coastline so tightly, yet the natural beauty had a calming effect, lulling many of the passengers into a sense of safety. Jane McFarquhar, sailing with her teenage daughter Grace, would later recall the sense of wonder and disbelief. Where is the danger spoken of? Where is the fear? At just before noon, lunch service commenced in the dining saloons of the ship. The feeling amongst the passengers was that of relief and excitement to finally be going ashore after an anxiety-filled crossing. That morning, the curtains were opened back up again, and many of the doorways and windows throughout the saloons, lounges, corridors, and cabins were opened up to let the fresh spring air in. Elsewhere on board, passengers moved through the midday routine. Many strolled the decks, others relaxed in deck chairs, and some, if they hadn't already, were preparing for disembarkation. Many of the passengers noted having seen luggage packed outside of cabin doors, in preparation for arriving in Liverpool in just a few short hours. Meanwhile, in second class, the overcrowded dining room required 2 seatings, with extra tables added to the second level, which was once a staircase landing. Lunch service lasted for nearly 3 hours in the saloons. At 2:05 p.m., the band inside the first-class dining room had just finished an encore, and began to move for the lounge, where the passengers could continue to listen to them play after a brief interlude. Up on deck just a few minutes later, off the starboard bow of the ship, several passengers on deck who were admiring the beautiful sea observed bubbles suddenly rising to the surface. At first, a few passengers who observed this thought it to be a porpoise. However, this belief was very quickly dashed when a perfectly straight, white trail of sea foam began to move forwards at astonishing speeds towards the hull of the ship. U-20 had fired a lone torpedo towards the Lusitania. It only took a third of an hour for the Ocean Greyhound to vanish beneath the waves at approximately 2:30 p.m. 1,198 innocent men, women, and children were lost when the Lusitania went down, including 128 citizens of the United States. The news of the sinking shocked the world. Across the Atlantic, the United States grappled with outrage and grief, but also the complexity of its neutral stance in the war growing more brutal by the day. On May 13, 1915, the U.S. government issued a formal note to Berlin, condemning the principles behind Germany's submarine warfare. Two follow-up notes continued to press the issue diplomatically, but they represented the limits of the official U.S. action at the time. The sinking of the Lusitania did not immediately bring the United States into war, but it marked a turning point. Public opinion began to shift. The very notion that the Atlantic could shield Americans from the violence of Europe became harder to sustain. And when the United States finally entered the Great War in 1917, it cited Germany's renewed campaign of unrestricted submarine warfare, begun again despite earlier diplomatic assurances, as a central reason. The Lusitania's loss was not only a maritime tragedy, it was a moment when the boundaries between civilization and military, and safety and war, were redrawn. The sinking of the Lusitania is a sad and somber reminder of how quickly peace can be swept away. It is a symbol of innocence lost, of civilians caught in the crossfire of global conflict, and of the fragile line between neutrality and involvement. May we never forget the 1,198 souls who were lost when the Lusitania went down.